train was slow that morning, and the fog outside the window was heavy and white. I sat near the glass, watching the fields pass quietly, and I thought of the place I was returning to after so many years. Brookfield School. The name still made something warm move inside me. I was 22 when I first arrived there, a shy and serious young woman who wanted to be a teacher but was afraid of almost everything. It was a cold autumn morning when I first walked through the school gate. The building was large and old, made of brown stone that looked tired but proud. The boys were loud, and their laughter filled the courtyard. They did not look at me when I passed, and I felt small and strange, like a visitor in a foreign country. My suitcase was heavy, and my heart beat fast as I entered the main hall. The headmaster, Mr. Weatherby, was waiting for me. He had kind eyes and a gentle smile. He spoke to me slowly, as if he already knew I was nervous. He told me to be firm but fair, to love the boys but not to spoil them, and to never let my fear control me. I remember how his words stayed in my mind all day. He said, "A teacher's life is long, Miss Benson, but it can be very good if you give your heart to it." That evening, I sat in my small room in the teacher's house. The wind moved the old windows, and the sound of the boys' laughter came from the field outside. I had a pile of books on my desk and a plan for my first lesson. I was going to teach history, and I wanted the boys to love it as much as I did. But I was afraid they would laugh at me, or worse, not listen at all. The next morning, I walked into the classroom with my papers in hand. The room was full of noise. When I spoke, nobody listened. A tall boy in the back was making jokes. Another threw a small piece of paper across the room. I tried to raise my voice, but it shook. Then I remembered what Mr. Weatherby said about giving your heart. So I stopped trying to sound strict and started to speak with warmth. I told them a story about an ancient battle, about courage and mistakes, and slowly the room became quiet. For the first time, they looked at me. That day changed everything. I learned that young people listen not when you shout, but when you speak with truth. From that moment, I began to enjoy my work. I stayed at Brookfield through the years, watching boys come and go, each one taking a small part of my heart with him. The seasons changed and the buildings aged, but my life became full of meaning there. A few years later, when I was 30, I went on a walking holiday to the mountains. I had been teaching for almost 10 years, and I was tired and a little lonely. One evening, as the sun was going down, I lost my way on a small path. I stopped near a lake where the water looked like glass. A woman's voice called from behind me, asking if I needed help. Her name was Catherine Ellis. She was different from anyone I had ever met. She was full of life, full of laughter. We walked together that evening until the stars came out. She told me stories about her travels and her work as a writer. I told her about Brookfield and my quiet life there. She smiled and said that quiet lives often hide the greatest hearts. I did not know then how deeply she would change mine. We became close friends in those few days. When I returned to school, she wrote to me every week. her letters full of kindness and wit. That winter, she came to visit. The boys were surprised to see her because visitors were rare at Brookfield. She made everyone laugh, even the headmaster. Her energy filled the whole school. It was strange for me to see her walking through the same halls that had always felt cold and silent. With her there, everything seemed brighter. We often sat near the fire in the evenings, and she would tell me that I was too serious, that life needed some color. She made me see that love and work could live together, that caring for others did not mean forgetting yourself. I began to smile more, to walk with lighter steps. The boys noticed it too. They started calling me Miss Clara the Kind. In the spring, something unexpected happened. Catherine and I decided to share a small house in the village. It was simple, with white walls and a garden full of roses. We both worked during the day, and in the evenings we read together or went for long walks. Those were the happiest years of my life. I felt young and full of hope. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. One evening, as we watched the sunset from the hill behind our home, she said softly that life was short and that people should spend it giving warmth, not holding it back. I did not know why she said it then, but I never forgot her words. A few months later, she became ill. It started as a cold that never went away. Doctors came and went, and I stayed beside her every night. She was weak, but she never complained. When the roses began to bloom again, she left me quietly one morning while the birds were singing outside our window. I thought my heart would stop too. I went back to Brookfield, but everything felt empty. The school looked the same, the lessons went on, but I was not the same woman. For weeks I spoke little, moving through my days like a shadow. The boys were kind. They left small flowers on my desk, and one of them wrote me a note saying, "We're sorry you are sad, Miss Clara." That simple note made me cry for the first time since Catherine's death. Over time, I began to teach again with feeling. I realized that every story I told, every lesson I gave, carried a part of her. Her belief in kindness became the heart of my teaching. I was no longer afraid of age or loneliness. I wanted to give my students what she had given me: courage, hope, and a little light for the hard days. Years turned into decades. New headmasters came, and many boys grew into men. Some became doctors, some soldiers, some fathers. They often came back to visit me, their old teacher. They told me that my stories had stayed in their minds for years, that something in the way I spoke had made them feel seen. I always smiled and told them it was their own strength that carried them forward, not mine. Now, as the train moves closer to the station, I can see the fields of Brookfield again. The same wide green lawns, the same old trees. I am 75 now, and the world has changed, but the school still stands. I have been invited back for the anniversary celebration. I feel nervous, like that young woman who first walked through the gate so many years ago. I wonder if they will remember me. I do not expect many to know my name, but I hope they will still remember a feeling, the quiet warmth of a teacher who once cared for them. The train slows down. I take a deep breath and gather my things. Outside, the fog has lifted, and the morning light touches the roofs of the school. For a moment, I close my eyes and think of Catherine's voice, light and full of life. I whisper a thank you to her and to all the boys who once filled my classroom with noise and laughter. Then I step out into the air, and the wind carries the smell of old wood and grass. It feels like coming home. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and let me know in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. When I stepped into the great hall of Brookfield again that morning, I almost forgot how many years had passed. The air still carried the same smell of books and floor polish, the same quiet echo of footsteps in the corridors. The boys were different, of course, but their laughter sounded the same. It was strange to see new faces where familiar ones used to be. Everything was both old and new at the same time, and I felt caught between two worlds. The current headmaster came to greet me. He was a kind man with a soft voice and polite manners. He called me Miss Benson and said the school would not be the same without me. He led me to the assembly room where a group of teachers were waiting. Some of them had been my students many years before. I could see it in their eyes when they recognized me. They smiled with a kind of respect that made my heart full. They showed me the classroom where I used to teach. The walls were brighter now, the desks newer, but the window still looked out on the same wide field. I could almost hear the voices of my old students. For a few minutes, I stood near the window and remembered them. I thought of their young faces, of the mistakes they made, and of how much they had grown. Many of them were fathers now, sending their own sons to Brookfield. That thought made me proud and a little sad at the same time. As I walked through the school, I met boys who greeted me with cheerful curiosity. They called me Miss Clara, as if the name had been passed down from one generation to another. One boy asked me if I had really taught during the war. I nodded, and his eyes grew wide. He said he could not imagine what that must have been like. I told him quietly that it was a time when the world changed, and so did we all. It had been during the Great War that my teaching years reached their hardest test. The war began quietly, like a shadow at first. Some of the older boys left to fight, and their younger brothers walked through the halls with proud but frightened faces. Each morning, I read the list of names of those who had joined the army. Some never came back. The headmaster used to stand at the front of the hall and read the letters from the front lines. Sometimes his voice broke, and the hall would fall silent. I taught history then, but it felt strange to speak of ancient battles when real ones were happening outside our own country. Yet somehow, those lessons helped. The boys listened closely, searching for meaning. We spoke about courage and loyalty, about what it meant to face fear and still move forward. I wanted them to see that bravery was not only found in soldiers, but also in those who stayed behind and carried on. Teaching was my way of staying brave. There were nights when the sirens sounded, and we had to move the boys to the cellar. I sat with them in the dim light, telling quiet stories to keep them calm. Some of them were only 12 or 13, but they tried to act like men. One small boy held my hand once and said he was not afraid. I knew he was, but I held his hand tighter and told him that bravery sometimes meant admitting you were scared. Those were long years. When the war finally ended, the school held a ceremony for all the students and teachers who had served or died. I stood near the front and watched the flags wave in the cold wind. The names of the fallen were read one by one. So many of them had once sat in my classroom, laughing and whispering when they thought I was not looking. My heart ached with pride and sorrow. After the ceremony, I went back to my room and sat in silence for a long time. I realized that a teacher never really loses her students. They remain with her in memory and spirit for life. After the war, life at Brookfield returned to a quieter rhythm. The school buildings were repaired and the gardens were green again. I was older now, slower perhaps, but I felt a deeper calm inside me. I no longer worried about being strict or perfect. I simply wanted to understand the boys, to guide them kindly. My classroom became a place of peace. The boys said I had the softest voice, but the strongest presence. They said it felt safe to learn with me, and that was the greatest compliment of all. Every year, a few new teachers came, young and full of ideas. They brought energy, but sometimes they also brought impatience. They wanted quick results, while I believed that true learning took time. I used to watch them rushing down the hall, carrying piles of papers, and I would smile. I remembered how I once did the same. In the evenings, some of them would come to my room for advice. I never gave them rules, only thoughts. I told them that students are like seeds and that you must give them both sunlight and space. Most of them listened kindly, and I saw them grow in confidence over time. As the years passed, my hair turned white and my steps slowed. Still, every morning I walked across the same courtyard, feeling the same wind on my face. I loved hearing the sound of the bell and the voices calling out across the field. Sometimes, the older boys would help me carry my books, and I could see that they did it not out of duty but affection. That simple act meant more to me than any reward. When I turned 60, the school gave me a small celebration. They called it a tea in my honor. It was a warm afternoon in June, and the hall was filled with flowers and sunlight. The headmaster spoke kindly about my years of service. The boys sang a song they had written for me. One of the lines said, "She taught us to listen with our hearts." I could not hold back my tears when I heard that. I thanked them and said that everything I gave to them was only what life had already given to me. After that day, I stayed for a few more years, but I knew my time as a teacher was ending. My memory was not as sharp as it used to be, and my hands sometimes trembled when I wrote on the board. One morning, as I watched a group of young boys running across the yard, I realized that the school no longer needed me every day. It would go on, as it always had, full of laughter and learning. I was ready to rest. When I finally retired, I moved to a small cottage near the coast. It was quiet. with a view of the sea and a garden that reminded me of my old home with Catherine. I filled my days with reading, walking, and writing letters to some of my former students. Many of them wrote back, telling me about their families, their jobs, and their memories of Brookfield. One letter came from a boy I had taught nearly 30 years earlier. He wrote that he had become a teacher because of me. He said he wanted his students to feel the same calm and safety that I had given him. That letter stayed in a small box on my table for the rest of my life. Sometimes I visited the school, especially in spring when the roses were in bloom. The younger teachers greeted me warmly and asked me to tell stories about the past. I told them how the school had survived the war, how the spirit of learning had always returned. They listened with bright eyes, and I could see in them the same hope I once had. It made me happy to know that the circle continued. Now, sitting by the sea, I think often about what my life has meant. It was not a life of great adventure or fame. I never became rich or well known, but I lived a life full of purpose. I helped shape minds, and I watched children become good people. Perhaps that is the truest success of all. When the evening light falls over the water, I often close my eyes and imagine the sound of the school bell ringing far away. It feels like a heartbeat, soft and steady, calling me home. I think of Catherine, of her laughter and her belief in warmth, and I whisper to myself that she was right. Life is short, and it is meant for giving light. I am old now, but I am not lonely. I carry thousands of memories, each one a voice, a smile, a story. They belong to the boys who once filled my classroom, and they live in me still. The sea outside my window glows with silver light, and I know that soon it will be time to say goodbye once more. But this time, I am ready. The years after my retirement were quiet, but full of reflection. Each morning, I woke to the sound of the sea outside my window and felt a calm that I had never known during my busy years at Brookfield. I kept my days simple. I walked in the garden, watched the birds near the fence, and sometimes baked bread for the children who lived in the houses nearby. They would knock on my door after school, bringing stories about their teachers, and I would listen with a smile. They did not know who I once was, but it did not matter. It felt enough to listen, to be near young voices again. Sometimes I would sit in my old chair near the window and look through my box of letters. Some were yellow with age, written by students who had grown old themselves. A few were from men who had once been small boys in my classroom. They told me about their families, their work, and their memories of those early years. Each letter reminded me that a teacher's work does not end when the lessons are over. It continues quietly in the lives of others. One letter arrived on a cold winter morning from the school itself. It was written by the new headmaster, who said they were planning a special event to celebrate the oldest living teachers of Brookfield. He invited me to visit, to see the school again, and to meet the new generation. At first, I hesitated. My health was weaker now, and the journey would be long. But then I thought of the school's fields, the echoing halls, and the sound of the morning bell. I knew I wanted to see it one more time. I took the train in early spring. The sky was soft and gray, and the air smelled of rain. When I arrived, a young woman from the school was waiting for me at the station. She helped me with my small suitcase and smiled warmly as she told me that many people were excited to meet me. As the car moved through the village, I saw familiar houses, the church tower, and the row of trees that lined the road to the school. Everything seemed smaller than I remembered, but perhaps it was only that I had grown old. When we arrived, I stepped out slowly and looked at the building. The walls were the same pale stone, but the roof had been repaired and the windows shone with new glass. The sound of boys' laughter came from the field, just as it always had. For a moment, I felt as if time had folded back on itself, and I was again the young woman walking through the gate with her lesson plans in hand. The headmaster welcomed me kindly and led me into the main hall. On the walls were photographs of past teachers and students. Some of the faces I recognized, others belonged to people I had never met. My own photograph hung near the end of the row. It showed me as I was in my middle years, standing near the classroom door, smiling softly. Seeing it filled me with emotion. I had almost forgotten that version of myself, but she looked content and calm, and that made me proud. The celebration was held in the great hall that evening. The students sat in neat rows while the teachers stood at the back. The headmaster gave a speech about the history of the school and the people who had shaped it. He spoke of kindness, patience, and dedication. Then he said my name, and everyone turned to look at me. For a moment, I wanted to hide, but then I stood up slowly and smiled. The boys clapped, and the sound filled the hall. I felt the same warmth that I had felt years ago when I taught my very first class. When the applause ended, the headmaster asked me to say a few words. My voice shook a little at first, but soon it became steady. I told them that a teacher's work is not about power or rules. It is about seeing each student as a whole person, even when they do not yet see it themselves. I told them that the greatest gift a teacher can give is belief, and that every act of care, even the smallest one, can change a life. The room was quiet as I spoke. I could see some of the younger teachers nodding, and that made me glad. After the ceremony, many students came to shake my hand. They said they had heard stories about me from their fathers and grandfathers who had studied at Brookfield. They called me Miss Clara, even though we had never met. One boy said that his grandfather used to tell him how I once read to them during air raids and how my calm voice had made them brave. I smiled and told him that his grandfather had been a brave boy too. That night, I stayed in a small guest room at the school. I could not sleep for a long time. The moonlight came through the window, and I listened to the soft wind outside. I thought of the hundreds of nights I had spent in those same walls, marking papers, planning lessons, or simply sitting quietly after a long day. So many of the moments that had seemed small back then now felt important. It struck me how life is made of such moments, quiet and ordinary, but full of meaning when you look back. In the morning, I walked around the school grounds one last time. The air was cool, and a thin mist hung over the field. I saw the classroom where I had once taught, and I stopped near the window. Inside, a new teacher was beginning her lesson. The boys were laughing, and she looked a little nervous but full of life. Watching her, I felt something like peace. The world goes on, I thought. The lessons never end. They simply pass from one heart to another. When I left the school that day, I knew it would be my last visit. The journey back home was slow, and I felt tired but content. I spent the next months quietly, writing a few more letters to my former students and tending my small garden. The days grew shorter, and the sea became rougher with the coming winter. My body was weak, but my mind was calm. One evening, I sat by the window and watched the sunset. The sky was full of pink and gold, and the light touched everything gently. I thought again of Catherine, my dear friend, and of her words about giving warmth instead of holding it back. I realized that she had been right. Every kind word, every patient moment, every lesson given with care had been a way of giving light. I had spent my life doing that, and I was grateful. A week later, I became ill. It was nothing sudden, just the quiet slowing of an old heart. The doctor came and told me to rest, but I already knew what was happening. I was not afraid. I wrote one last letter to the headmaster of Brookfield, thanking him for inviting me to return and asking him to tell the students that I had never stopped thinking of them. I ended the letter with a line I had once told my class long ago. Be kind, because kindness lasts longer than any lesson. On my final morning, I woke to the sound of the sea. The light was soft and white through the window. I felt no pain, only stillness. My last thought was of the classroom filled with sunlight, of the faces turned toward me as I spoke about history and courage, of the laughter and the rustle of notebooks. It was all still there, somewhere, alive in time. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the sea carry me away. At Brookfield, when the news arrived, the school held a small memorial. The boys stood silently, and the headmaster spoke about my life. He said that Miss Clara Benson had taught thousands of students, but had touched many more hearts. They placed a small wooden plaque on the classroom wall with my name on it. It said simply, "She gave her heart to teaching." Years later, the plaque was still there, though few people remembered exactly who I was. But the spirit of care and patience remained in those halls. Every time a teacher spoke gently to a frightened student, or a boy found courage to try again after failure, something of me was alive. That, I think, is what it means never to be forgotten. And so, though my voice is quiet now, I believe it still lives in the wind that moves through Brookfield's open windows, in the sound of lessons beginning, and in the laughter of young lives learning to find their way. It is not a loud voice, but a gentle one, and it whispers only this: to teach is to love, and to love is to live forever. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.